Hello, I'm Scott Thompson, and welcome to After 10. It's hard to believe, but the Arab Spring hit its 3-year mark in December. We've seen dictators fall in that time, and it appeared that we may be seeing a true Arab Spring happen before our very eyes. However, things took a violent and tumultuous turn in recent months. So what does 2014 have in store for the Middle East? We turn to an expert for answers. At the end of 2010, the corruption of power, the gap between the rich and poor, youth unemployment, and tensions boiling under the surface led to the start of the Arab Spring. Egypt, Libya, Yemen, and Tunisia, 4 countries whose leaders were ousted from power. There have been constant attacks by Islamic militants in these states. In Syria, the military and rebel forces have been in a state of civil war for the past 3 years, with well over 100,000 people being killed. Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi was overthrown by the military after just over a year in power. And in Libya, while Muammar Gaddafi is long gone, peace and stability have been hard to come by. Iran and the P5+1 came to an historic agreement on November 24th. The agreement calls on Iran to suspend the production of high-grade uranium for nuclear weapons. The Middle East is the base for our energy supply, so changes in the region are being closely monitored as they may directly affect our national interest. We bring in Jang Ji-hyung to the studio, an expert on the Middle East, to learn more about the issues at hand and what Korea's role in all of it is. Dr. Jang, thank you very much for being on the program.
Thanks for having me.
Let's begin with the Iranian nuclear negotiations. We saw the P5+1 and Tehran come to an agreement. The coming year, 2014, we're going to see much of the process play itself out. The wheels for the process will get in motion here. How do you see the process playing out over the coming months?
I think as far as we have the reformist President Hassan Rouhani, the process will be positive. I mean, the election of Hassan Rouhani just provided, better opportunity to reset the troubled relationship between Iran and the Western, international community. Less than 4 months after his inauguration, the negotiations just produced, the joint plan of action. The interim nuclear agreement. The final decision about the Iranian nuclear agreement should be made by the Supreme Leader Khamenei. Indeed, Iranian president has quite limited foreign policy making power.
And when you look at the agreement, what do you see as being the key issues that are contained within it?
The first thing is about just halting all enrichment above 5%, and also dismantling the technical connections required to enrich above 5%, and no further activities at Iraq, and more daily access by IAEA's inspectors at Natanz and Fordo.
And the inspections are really a major issue here moving forward, are they not? Iran, are they going to be willing to let inspectors get full access to their sites? That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah, I think they are supposed to do, because, again, the sanctions really hurt the Iranian economy so badly. And they kept claiming that it's kind of like unfair compared to the North Korean case. And Iran is still the member of NPT. But somehow international community, led by the United States, gave more rewards and incentives toward North Korea, but harsh punishment toward Iran. But again, Iran is supposed to follow those agreements so that they can have more sanction relief.
And when this Iranian nuclear agreement came to fruition, there was speculation that this might lead down the line to a North Korean nuclear deal as well. How do you see that prospect playing out down the line?
I don't think the current Iranian interim nuclear agreement will affect North Korea a lot. I mean, there are kind of like three reasons for that. First, Iran is one of the better democracies along with Turkey, Israel, Lebanon in the region, with more checks and balances and competitive elections. Even though there was like a 2009 presidential election fraud and violent crackdowns toward the civil society, but that country has more civil society and middle class. And also Iran has massive oil reserves. So sanctions really hurt that country's economy, whereas North Korea's economy is really weird and tiny and little.
And how does it affect us here in South Korea, what we're seeing here with the agreement and the nuclear program?
I think Korea has keen interest in trade relations with Iran. Again, Iran is major oil exporting countries, and also in Iraq, there are about 2,000 Korean SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, and those SMEs were considered as vehicle for economic growth and job creations, and they are really important for the current Park Geun-hye administration's performance. So I think the sanctions relief is a really good test for Park Geun-hye administration's economy performance as well.
What began as a civilian uprising in Syria in January 2011 turned into large-scale unrest in March of the same year. The violence escalated into a civil war, and the bloodshed continues to this day. The war has contributed to the deaths of well over 100,000 people, with tens of millions of others becoming refugees. A chemical weapons attack targeting civilians in August 2013 was responsible for up to 1,400 deaths. Let's talk about Syria now. We've almost hit the 3-year mark of the civil war. That'll come in March. We've seen tens of thousands of people die. There's a refugee crisis right now. The bloodshed continues as well. People look to 2014 as maybe being a year, where some sort of resolution will be made. Do you see any prospects for that happening over the coming months?
I don't see we are going to see any rosy resolutions yet, mostly because there are two broad goals for the Geneva II conference. It's about dealing with the Assad regime and also Islamic jihadists. But then there are no really shared agreement between the actors and participants. For instance, the international anti-Assad coalition members, such as Turkey, Saudi, Qatar, United States, and EU, do not want to see Assad in power. We can provide more incentives for China, Russia, Iran to give up their support for Assad. And also this way, we might integrate the diverse opposition groups within Syria and tame more violent jihadists.
So these are the small steps that you think could be taken in Syria to come to some sort of resolution. It's very hard to be optimistic when you look at the situation in Syria right now. Bashar al-Assad's been very resilient compared to the other leaders we've seen fall from the Arab Spring. Why is that? Why is he so resilient?
I think the internal cohesion of the ruling core military elite is very strong compared to other countries like Tunisia, Egypt, Yemen, and Libya. And also the sporadic responses from the international community is, led by, again, the ambivalent international anti-Assad coalition.
So the question then, what is it going to take for the civil war in Syria to come to an end? How do you see it ending?
I think ending this disastrous civil war might require possible coup within those Syrian ruling elite. Mostly the military elite.
What are the implications for the rest of the Middle East and in turn the rest of the world?
The international community should act more consistently based on democracy, value, and humanitarianism. The region, the Middle East, has suffered from several external interventions because of the presence of Israel and oil resources, and also like the radical Islamist. Middle Eastern people think that the West has double standard. They think that the West is very generous toward undemocratic Saudi and other GCC oil exporting countries, whereas they are very harsh against, like Iran with relatively competitive elections. So we need to have more consistent standard and humanitarianism and international norms.
What about Korea's role in everything we're seeing in Syria?
The Middle East situation could be a very good test for Korea's middle power aspirations. We need to keep strongly condemn any chemical use against the civilians and any violence against the civilians. And also we need to promise more, say, humanitarian refugee assistance. And in line with the government's effort to build up Korea's global presence, probably providing more refugee assistance will be a good strategy for Korea.
Hosni Mubarak's reign of power that lasted 30 years came to an abrupt end in 2011 following weeks of protests. Mohamed Morsi was elected as Egypt's president in 2012, but was overthrown by the military 1 year later. The military has seized power once again. The nation's interim government has labeled the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist organization, and tensions are high again. Now, one of the forefathers of the Arab Spring, Egypt, ousted Hosni Mubarak. It then democratically elected Mohamed Morsi, who was then overthrown by the military, which begs the question, where is all this headed?
The current Egypt is not far from Egypt under Mubarak. It's really sad. The Morsi government has not really improved the economic situation. And also the government wanted to seek to expel secular liberal opposition groups and try to push more Islamic agendas. Democratizations create more expectation from people. So people who are not really happy with the situation ask the military to expel the Islamic government. Fortunately or unfortunately, Islamic government was the only powerful opposition groups against the secularist dictatorship.
All of this really underscores the power of the military in Egypt. What is their end game here? What do they want?
I think their top priority interest is about keeping their power. I mean, after 60 years of accumulating power as a whole institution, the Egypt military cannot be tamed by politicians.
Unrest in Egypt has huge implications for the region. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about what those implications are.
Okay, in the region, the key tension is between the secularist and Islamist. And Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt has been the key opposition groups against the secularist dictators. But then now we are witnessing the demise of moderate political Islam. And moderate political Islam, the Muslim Brotherhood, was again very developed political organization with a large constituency. And they are expelled by the military in Egypt. The bad thing is that usually moderate political Islam is a great bulwark against more violent, more radical, more extremist. I think we are going to see probably more dangerous political Islamists in Egypt since the demise of Muslim Brotherhood.
We're seeing increased tension between secularists and radical Islamists, especially in Egypt. Why is that? What are we seeing there?
I think external interventions provided a very good excuse of secularist dictatorship and radical Islamism. Meaning, for instance, due to the colonial legacy by Britain and France, all the organizations in civil society in Egypt has been very weak or too radical, too militant, without experience any political negotiations or settlement or fact making. And the US has been supporting those secularist dictators. And then at the same time, the radical Islamists are arguing that the Islam is the only solution, justifying their violence. So that's why secularists backed by the West never wanted to lose their power. And at the same time, radical Islamists arguing that they are made by the Western plot, and they just use the violence justifying their political goals.
And some people look at all the events that have transpired in recent months and years, and they come to a conclusion that radical Islamism is sort of losing its power in the region. Is that a reality?
Yes, I think so. People started to learn the value of rule of law and pluralism in the process of democratization in a more open society. 2011 Arab Spring Revolution just opened more spaces for people to express their preferences and grievances. And people start to learn how democracy and pluralism working. So they decide not to listen to those radical Islamists. But then again, what I worried is the demise of moderate political Islam, because they can be a good shield against the radical Islamists. But now we are witnessing the demise of radical Islamists, but unfortunately at the same time the demise of moderate political Islam as well.
And if we do see some of that, looking at the international community, looking at the big picture, what are we going to see happen if there is unrest, that level of unrest in Egypt?
Well, Egypt is a very important player in the region. Very traditional, negotiator in, say, Palestinian-Israel negotiations and Iranian nuclear agreement, and even the Syrian civil war. So what we need to do is that probably more active and democratic Egypt. And that's something that we need to support.
We look at all of the problems in the Middle East. They are seemingly countless. There are so many. The international community would like, of course, to do something to bring peace and stability to the region. However, those solutions, those resolutions are hard to come by. What can the international community do at this time, presently, to make sure that things do stabilize in the region?
I think the international community need to keep, again, not the double standard, but more consistent and constant actions based on democratic value and humanitarianism. Somehow that region has suffered from several external interventions. And they do not trust the so-called international community. So what we need to do is, again, more humanitarian protection and assistance.
And if I may play devil's advocate for a moment, humanitarian aid is one thing. Bringing solutions, though, to the region is a completely separate thing. Aside from helping those that need help, who are caught in the middle of all the conflicts there, what can you do to actually bring about a resolution to all of the issues that we're seeing there?
Okay, for instance, for Syria, the international community should not repeat the same mistake that we done in Iraq. In Iraq, the international community purged and punished all the political elites and the party members. And now we are witnessing hopeless ethno-sectarian crisis. So in Syria, the international community need to have more democratic pluralist standard and try to oust only Assad and small handful ruling elites, not the entire Ba'ath Party members.
Korea has long viewed the Middle East as a land of opportunity, financial reasons, oil, of course, construction. There are tax benefits to be had there as well. Considering all the unrest that we've seen over the recent years, is that still true today?
I believe so. I mean, the Middle East, especially the oil exporting countries, especially, particularly GCC countries, is a really great market for us to sell, to invest, and to plant everything. But again, now Korea as a more responsible global actor, okay, we should do business with the Middle East. But at the same time, we should be more, responsible middle power as well. Therefore, again, we need to continue to provide more humanitarian assistance toward Syria. And also we might want to support more democratic Egypt, not really the military, directing Egypt. We can develop more trade relations with Iran, but at the same time, we need to provide more incentives toward Iran so that we can, control the nuclear connections between Iran and North Korea. So, okay, let's do the business, but at the same time, let's keep our position as responsible middle power.
When we look at everything that's transpired over the past several months and we look ahead to 2014, what should Korea's response be to all that we've seen?
I think Korea's response should be very close to the response by the international community as a whole. I mean, this can be a very good test for Korea's middle power aspirations. So we need to call on the Assad regime to respect more international norms and humanitarianism, and also to refrain from the use of WMD. And for Egypt, the Korean government might want to support more democratic civilian Egyptian government. And for Iran, Korean government might want to support, the reformist President Hassan Rouhani, and might want to weaken more conservative Iranian Revolutionary Guard faction. So again, democracy, pluralism, and humanitarianism.
These are all very difficult questions without any easy answers. Dr. Jung, thank you very much for being on the program and providing some insights today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you, as always, for watching. We'll see you next time, After 10.